We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Glory UGA podcast, the podcast designed for all of you diehard Georgia fans. And if you fit that description and you haven't already, go ahead, subscribe to this channel right now, turn those notifications on because you don't want to miss any of the content we have planned for you leading up to the 2025 season. And everything we do on this channel, guys, it's not for the casual fans. It is for you. So make sure to subscribe, like, comment, tell me what you guys think about today's episode. Get that conversation started. And for full episodes of our show, check out the Glory UJ podcast wherever you get your pods. But all right, guys, let's go ahead and dive right into today's show. Friday, a couple of days ago now, was one of the, I don't think this is a stretch. Maybe some of you think it is, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that Friday was one of the biggest days in the entire history of college athletics as the long gestating House settlement has officially been approved and paved the way for an era of college football that, to be quite honest with you guys, there was a time in my life where I never thought we would see this era where schools are now going to be directly paying their athletes. There's still a lot of unknowns in terms of how this is going to ultimately play out. What are the unintended consequences? All those kind of things. We'll find that stuff out in the coming years. But what I am prepared to say right now is that I think the Georgia football program is poised to be one of the winners of this House settlement and the new era that it ushers forth. Now, to understand where I'm coming from, let's quickly, guys, I know a lot of you are probably familiar with this by now because it's been everywhere over the past couple of days since this settlement was officially finalized. But in case you missed it and you aren't, like, you've heard the House settlement, but you aren't exactly sure what it's going to do, you know it's going to be schools paying players, but you're kind of fuzzy on the details. Let's quickly run through exactly what's going to change. I'm going to do my best, guys, here to channel my inner Pete Thamel, Brett McMurphy here on this. But we finally have gotten what coaches, college administrators have been begging for years now. And what we're getting is some sort of structure, some guardrails on this NIL era that we have been living in for the past 4 or 5 years. Yes, schools, like, I think that's the headline. I think most people know this. Schools are now going to be directly compensating players. They are paying players to play ball, whatever sport it is, right? But there's a catch to it, right? They're paying them, but those payments are capped. It's roughly $20.5 million for every program, up to $20.5 million. The schools don't have to spend the full $20.5 million if they don't want to, but most schools, some of the Power Four schools out there, are going to choose to do that so they can remain remotely competitive. But roughly $20.5 million for athletic departments across all sports, right? It's not just $20.5 million for football, but that's going to be spent at the athletic department's discretion, however they see fit. If you're an SEC school, maybe you want to dedicate more money to football because that's the highest revenue generating program you have. Maybe if you're a Big East program in basketball, with a lion's share of your money, it's going to go towards college basketball. So it's up to the athletic department, to their discretion, how they want to spend this money. And that $20.5 million will increase every year over the 10-year House settlement. Now, for Georgia, the estimates that I have seen are roughly around like $13.5 million or so annually will be budgeted to Georgia football to pay players. All right. Then you got basketball. They will make a nice chunk of change there. Baseball, and then you got the rest of the sports as well. But football is going to make the most of it because it's the sport that drives the entire athletic department. We know that. And this new structure, really, like the intention here is to replace the pay for play. Like, that's really what it was, guys. They wouldn't call that straight up, but that's what it was. Like, we all know, we've seen it. Replace that pay for play NIL system that has developed over the past couple of years. Now, that's not how NIL. If you go back to the origins of NIL, I remember when NIL first got rolled out. Initially, it was not supposed to be pay for play. In fact, like, there were express rules against, like, no, you cannot pay players to play. There has to be some sort of deliverable that they provide. They have to deliver on something, right? Well, very quickly, schools out there put the NCAA to the test. Like, okay, are you going to enforce that? And very quickly, we realized, no, they're not. So, yeah, it very quickly devolved into pay for play. It was intended as something very different. It devolved into pay for play because the NCAA enforcement was just toothless. Like it's been toothless for a long time, but it was never more obvious than it was with how NIL played out. Now, NIL is not dead per se. It's just being kind of like reined in here a little bit. There are mechanisms that have been and are currently being put in place to ensure that the NIL money that players can receive, they can still get NIL money, but it's more along the lines like the original idea of what NIL was supposed to be, like actual NIL money, where it's not boosters just dropping bags with no deliverables required. It's not a booster just paying a guy $8-10 million over the course of 3 years, like you see with Mark Bowman allegedly with USC over the past week or two, without like any kind of like deliverable where he has to actually go out and like do something, right? It's supposed to eliminate that. There's mechanisms that are trying to at least eliminate that. And I know that there are people, and there's a part of me as well, but there are a lot of people out there that are skeptical of whether the dropping of bags by boosters out there is going to be eliminated. Like, and I get it. I get why there'd be some skepticism there. But I will say, like, there's a part of me that is skeptical. Like, will that actually happen? Or will it kind of drive it underground and go back to like the bagman, like under the radar stuff that we had pre NIL, like it's been going on forever in college football? But I will say I'm trying here. I am cautiously optimistic that at the least, I think the dropping of bags that we've seen over the last couple of years will be far less commonplace. It'll be far harder to do and get away with than what it has been, which has been like the wild, wild west here for the past couple of years. Because the enforcement of this, of the NIL, it's no longer in the NCAA's hands. It's not. Like we know, again, it's been toothless for a long time because they haven't had subpoena power. People just laugh in their face. They can't make you do anything, right? But there is now a new, they're calling it the College Sports Commission, the CSC. The acronym's already out there. They hired a guy, a Major League Baseball executive. I think his name was Brian. I got right here, Brian Seeley. He is now in charge of this. He's kind of like he's not the college sports czar. I know people have been calling for like this college football commissioner for a long time. That's not really what he is, but he's kind of like the enforcement czar in a way. It's really what it is because this college sports commission that he's been tasked with running, which he's getting paid 7 figures a year, by the way, guys. It has been established as the new enforcement arm of this House settlement era. Now, I like a lot of you have had questions like, well, if the NCAA couldn't enforce these rules, how is this new college sports commission be able to enforce them? Well, allegedly, they're going to have some form of subpoena power. Essentially, the Power Four conferences and I guess the G5 conferences as well, they've all agreed to essentially abide by the rulings of this college sports commission. And I think part of that is like, yeah, if you ask us for information, we're going to give it to you, right? I think that's more or less the agreement there. Again, that's part of like what's still kind of dubious there to a degree, but that's kind of the word on that. And this College Sports Commission will have final say on whether rules have been broken, and then if they deem those rules have been broken, what are the punishments going to be for those infractions? And they've contracted a high profile accounting firm. I think it's Deloitte. I think you pronounce it Deloitte. I don't know. I'm probably saying that wrong, but a high profile accounting firm out there to operate what is essentially an NIL clearinghouse. The technical name for it's going to be, I found this out on Friday, NIL Go. That is the NIL clearinghouse. And what that means is basically if you want to pay a player for NIL, if you want to strike a deal with an advertising deal, partnership, whatever, you have to get that approved by this NIL Go clearinghouse. And they've established certain guidelines to help them determine, is this a legitimate NIL deal or is it just paid for play? And if they don't approve it, like the player can take the money, but from my understanding is like he'll just be ineligible. He won't be able to play. So that's more or less in a nutshell what we're facing here in this new era. That's what we're about to embark on. So practically, what does that mean? What does that mean for Georgia? What does that mean for other college sports programs out there? Well, I think on the most basic level, it means that the playing field has now been leveled, at least far more so than it has been in recent years with this pay for play wild, wild west NIL era that we have seen, because now schools will be operating largely under the same financial parameters. Let's be real, guys. With NIL, that has certainly not been the case. Different schools operating with vastly different budgets and the recruiting rankings play that out, right? And who guys are, or what schools are getting this guy, this 5-star. We've seen that play out based on how much money, how much NIL money, how much collective money do you have to throw around? What are your boosters willing to drop? And I think this means that you're not going to see schools handing out, like I mentioned Mark Bowman a little bit earlier, because he's the most recent example of this, like an alleged $8 to $10 million deal over 3 years to high school juniors. You're not going to see that because schools are not going to be able to win. Another way to look at this, I would say this: if you really want to boil it down, what does this mean practically? I don't think schools any longer are going to be able to win, whether that's on the field or win recruiting battles, simply by outspending their peers, at least on players. Because again, there is a cap that all schools, a common cap that they're all operating under. And that is why I believe that Georgia football is going to emerge in this new house settlement era as one of the big winners. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to sell you that Georgia doesn't play the NIL game because that would be factually inaccurate. That is certainly not the case. Georgia plays the NIL game. There's no way that Georgia finished in the top three, even in the NIL era over the past couple of years in recruiting without paying players. So I'm not sitting here saying, oh my God, Georgia's just been some poverty program like all these other schools and spending money. We have had no money to spend. That's not the case. Like we are very well funded, but at the same time, it's also true that yeah, we have NIL money, we spent NIL money, we structured it a little bit differently under Kirby Smart, but we also don't have boosters that have been willing or able, whatever it might be, to pony up the type of cash that some other programs out there have been in recent years. And look, like again, like we've hit on some high profile guys, and you don't hit on those guys without paying them something. But the reality is, like, we just haven't been winning like the big, massive bidding wars for these top 5-star guys. When it becomes a bidding war and the player's driven by NIL, and that's a massive factor in his decision, by and large, we have been winning those battles, right? And the proof is there. I mean, guys, we've lost a number of recruits over the past couple of years that if you go back pre-NIL, I feel very strongly that we would have landed. Now, you never know, right? I mean, but as somebody who follows recruiting very closely, I feel like guys like Dylan Raiola, who, by the way, his entire family moved cross country to Georgia so they could go to Georgia. But the last second, a baggage dropped. Sure, okay, his legacy there, all that matters too. But a big baggage dropped, and we're like, yeah, no, we're good. We're gonna match that. So we lose on Dylan Raiola. Justice Terry, right? With Texas coming in at the very last second there, dropping a big bag. Jackson Cantwell recently, Mark Bowman most recently, just to name a few. Those are some high-profile names that I feel like 5-6 years ago, Georgia would have landed all those guys, in my opinion. Maybe you disagree. That's fine, but I believe that we would have landed those guys, but we lost them because, in my opinion, they got offers they simply couldn't refuse, right? Like, I mean, it's a business for them. Like, if you can offer, you can't refuse. Like, at some point, like, you just got to take it. And we weren't willing to match or go high enough to get to where it could compensate for what they were offering. And I just don't think that is going to happen nearly as often now. Teams can still outbid you. There might be a player here or there that we get outbid for, but I do think that's going to be far less common because if you do try to just go way above market and outbid teams for a specific guy, that's going to have a much more tangible effect on your ability to fill out your entire roster because now you're operating on this parameter of, hey, we have an actual salary cap here. It's not like, well, you know what? Like, yeah, we might need to raise a little bit more money to go get this guy, but we can come up with that cash. Well, it's not a matter of can you come up with the cash, it's a matter of do you have cash within your salary cap left to spend? So you're gonna have to ask that question. If you want to outbid somebody like Miami recently, right, or USC this cycle, are you willing to leverage the rest of your class to go out and get this one guy? Right? That's a question that's gonna be far more real for a lot of different programs out there now that we have an official cap on spending and these wild, wild west days of the NIL era of recent years are now behind us. Because now we are embarking on an era where we're going to see some of those old school recruiting skills, some of those old school recruiting factors that have been de-emphasized largely in the NIL era. Those factors are now going to make a return to prominence. Things like building relationships with recruits, coaches outworking their peers in the recruiting game, like Kirby Smart's been doing for years. The reputation of your school, the history of your school, the fan base, the tradition, the location, the college town, the appeal of that college town, all these old school factors that used to matter more than they did in the NIL era, I think that they are going to be re-emphasized. And those factors that I just listed off for you guys, those just happen to be areas that Georgia under Kirby Smart has excelled at, and I believe will continue to excel in this new house settlement era. And look, I'm not saying those factors didn't matter. I'm not saying like building relationships with recruits didn't matter. I'm not saying that the history of your program, the winning tradition, I'm not saying that the college town didn't matter. I'm just saying they didn't matter as much when players also had to factor in how much money are you willing to pay me. Those factors were still there, but they were de-emphasized. They were neutralized to a degree because let's just be real, we're all human, we all have needs. Money talks, right? Money talks. But now, with I think the ability of schools to throw out offers they can't refuse, I think that ability has been reined in. Like throwing out offers are just kind of wild, maybe above market value. With that being reined in, I do think that those old school factors that Kirby Smart and this Georgia program have excelled at, I think those now are going to increase in value once again. I think they're going to be re-emphasized. But here is where I believe that Georgia will really emerge as one of the winners of this house settlement era, because I think there are two areas. If I really had to boil it down, all those factors I mentioned a second ago, I think they all matter. I think Georgia's elite in those areas, and I think that's really going to help us in this new house settlement era. But I think there's two areas specifically that above all others are going to drive success moving forward for any program out there in this house settlement era. Because we're now in an era, guys, again, we're in an era where every program has the same amount of money to spend, right? This year, $2.5 million is supposed to increase incrementally over the course of the 10-year length of this contract or this settlement. But those two factors that I think now are going to be elevated above all others in terms of winning on the field, on-field success, are evaluation and development. Okay, now hear me out here. Yeah, how you deploy your talent, how you use them like offensive coordinators, calling plays, all that kind of thing, the culture, all that, it still matters. All that matters. But I do believe now when every program out there is operating on this a more level playing field. It's never going to be a fully level playing field, but at least financially, it's going to be in the money that you can directly pay players operating on a level playing field. I think now it's going to be more important than ever to be able to out evaluate and out develop your peers. I think those are the two keys to success moving forward for any program out there. And once again, as with all those old school recruiting tactics, all those old school recruiting factors that Georgia has excelled in under Kirby Smart, evaluation and development are two other areas that Georgia under Kirby Smart has been straight up elite. And I know rival fan bases are going to fight back on that, but let's go through this real quick here, guys. Evaluation development, all right? Well, number one, here's why evaluation matters, okay? On the top end, when you're spending money, okay, everyone has the same amount of money to spend, right? When you are spending money at the high end, getting the top end players, you want to make sure that those investments are wise, that you are a good steward of that money. Because if you go and you can spend a lot of money on player X, but player X doesn't end up panning out, well, man, you just waste a lot of cash. It might be a decent chunk of your annual salary cap on this guy that did not pan out. Okay, so you got to be wise there. If I'm going to spend this much money on someone, I better make sure, by God, that this dude is worth it. And on the bottom end, if you're going to be doling out bigger cash payments to maybe the higher recruited guys who can command more money coming out of high school, you also want to try to find some guys that might be more of a bargain, that maybe aren't as highly recruited coming out of high school, that might have a great deal of potential, but maybe a little rough around the edges, maybe a little bit smaller than what your typical prototype would be at a certain position, but you can see that talent, right? And then if you find some guys like that, well, you don't have to pay them as much coming out of high school. Now, once they come to campus and they start proving on the field, now you got to up their payment, sure. But being able to find those kind of like diamonds in the rough at the bottom end of a class, I think that's also going to be a critical part of success moving forward in this NIL era. So evaluation is going to be huge, and Georgia has been awesome at that under Kirby Smart. I'm just going to name a couple guys for you. Let's go back early Kirby Smart. Jordan Davis, right? We all know what Jordan Davis grew into. But let's not forget, coming out of high school, I'm not going to say Jordan Davis was a nothing recruit. That wouldn't be fair. But he was a 3-star guy. I think he was the number 44 ranked defensive tackle in the country coming out of high school that year. In Georgia, we put a high degree of value on him, and we went after that guy, and we ultimately landed him. And then once we got him, what did we do? We developed him into a first-round draft pick. He was not a first-round draft pick when he got to college. He was a guy that had the potential to develop into that, but he had to develop, and that's where we got this guy, Ladd McConkey. This is a guy that really no one out there at the powerful level was recruiting. Even Georgia, we didn't throw an offer to him at the very last second. We had an available scholarship. We said, you know what? We like this kid. We like what he's made of. I think he can make some plays for us. Let's just throw a flyer out there and see what happens. And then we brought him in, got the evaluation, and then obviously we developed Ladd to like a fringe first-round draft pick. He's out there starting for the Chargers right now and doing big things as a rookie. Think about some of the preferred walk-ons. You got Dan Jackson, Cash Jones, Prather Hudson, Stetson freaking Bennett, guys. We're talking about the ultimate eval and development story with Stetson Bennett. Guys in the secondary like Chris Smith. Again, wasn't an afterthought recruit, but wasn't this really highly recruited guy. Same thing with Javon Bullard in that COVID year. We targeted those guys. We identified them, we targeted them, and we went and got them. When a lot of schools out there weren't recruiting those guys nearly as hard, but we were because our evals were on. We hit on those evals, and then again, all those guys you can say, yeah, we evaluate, we hit on the eval, but we also hit on the development aspect, right? Jordan Davis developed that guy from a guy that had immense potential, but was really raw coming out of high school. Ladd McConkey developed him into, again, a fringe first-round guy. Stetson Bennett developed him into, I think, arguably the greatest quarterback in Georgia football history. Who cares what happens in the NFL? At Georgia and college, Stetson Bennett was a freaking monster. Dan Jackson, all the dude did was make plays for Georgia. Cash Jones has developed into a really good football player for Georgia, impact player for us on offense. Chris Smith, Bullard, we know what those guys were able to do in the Georgia secondary. So those are two areas, guys, where Georgia, let's be real, if you're being objective here, has excelled at. And I think those two areas are going to be emphasized more than any others in this new House settlement era. And here's the thing, guys. It's wild to think this. Even with the financial situation that we found ourselves in, where these kind of like wild, wild west days of the NIL era, Georgia still recruited at a top 3 level, despite bags being dropped here, bags being dropped there. And yeah, we're spending NIL money, but we're not outbidding teams for these high 5-star guys. That's just not what we were willing to do, right? But we still somehow managed to finish inside the top 3, right? In an era where some of our greatest strengths, some of the areas that we held advantages over other programs prior to NIL were neutralized to a large degree by the money that was being thrown around out there, by the bags that were being dropped. And now, as we are set for this new era, this next era of college football wrought by the House settlement, an era where all those strengths, all those recruiting strengths, all those recruiting advantages that we used to be able to leverage, that we once enjoyed, that were devalued in the NIL era, they're once again going to be elevated in importance in this new era that we are about to embark on. So the Georgia football program, guys, that's why I believe it is poised to not only maintain, but extend its recruiting dominance in this new era. And as a result, will remain in contention for national championships on an annual basis for the foreseeable future. But all right, guys, there you guys go. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. Again, if you're a diehard Georgia fan, what are you waiting on? Go ahead, hit that subscribe button right now. Get a ton more content, guys, planned for you. I have a whole list of episodes. I got it all planned out for the rest of the summer. Of course, things pop up. The news hits. We'll cover that as well. But we have a ton of great content planned for you guys all summer long, previewing the 2025 season. And we're just getting started, guys. So you don't want to miss any of that. Subscribe right now. Turn those notifications on. Make sure to like this video and get that conversation started. Let me know what you guys think about NIL. Am I off base here? Am I giving Georgia too much credit, or do you guys agree? I love to hear from you guys. But thank you again so much for being here. I'm Tyler, and as always, go Dogs!
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.